What are the BIM advantage in your point of view?
Well, I think they're huge. I suppose the first and most obvious advantage is that too often people who are working on a project are working from different sets of data, different drawings, different specifications, because they're constantly being revised. So to have a single version of everything in one place, everybody knows is current, is the first and most simple advantage. Next, I think the obvious things of checking whether design information is coordinated, so that the programs themselves can test whether two objects want to be in the same place at the same time, which is a long-standing big issue for the industry. But most importantly, really, is the way it will drive reform of the industry, I think. Some of our bad habits about a lack of integration, the way we work in separate silos and so on, that's cost a lot of money, caused a lot of dispute, and I think it'll play an important part in breaking that down.
What advice would you give to a firm considering to make a switch to BIM?
Well, it depends if they're a client or a contractor. For a client, and I think clients must think about this as much as the contractors must and the supply side must. For a client, the most important advice is to map their processes, to work out actually what their own processes are for getting buildings specified, the information they need at every stage, and the process they will follow to get the job done, because there's no point in digitizing a bad process as part of the reform process. And be absolutely clear about the information needs at every stage. I think on the supply side, the most important thing is to learn how to work together. It's a cultural thing. It's far more important than the technology. The people who are used to kind of being in charge of the process and they hand it down through the supply chain and so on, that has to change into a more led process. We need leadership, but a team-based process. So for them, the big change is a cultural one.
What do you feel is more challenging when making the switch to BIM?
I think the thing I've already said, which is the cultural challenge. It just is a new way of working, and it's very different. And of course, if you're born into an old way of working, then you develop all of your instincts around that. So people at the moment, we spend a huge amount of time in construction arguing with each other. And you might think, therefore, the person who argues best does best. And that has to go for BIM, into understanding how you will use this for a new kind of commercial and competitive advantage. So that big cultural change comes way ahead of the technology change.
Your work is well known internationally. So can you tell us what you are working on now?
Well, I'm not doing much internationally just at the moment, but as far as BIM's concerned, governments generally like to think they're leading markets, that we are the best in the world at this thing. And so the British government was very keen on driving progress in the use of BIM. The next challenge that one had to confront with them was there is no point in being in a race and winning it if there's nobody else behind you. And the difficulties that BIM is trying to overcome are largely centered on the different ways of codifying information or producing information. And if every country sets a different standard again, we'll be back where we started. So effort now going into trying to spread the message internationally, well, I'm here, about the fact that we need to keep the situation open and competitive. But we do need to start working in consistent codes, consistent language, so we can talk to each other, or information can talk to each other in a way that doesn't just add a new source of confusion. So that's the big interest now, is trying to connect the initiatives that are going on in most countries with a developed industry.
How do you see the future of BIM in your country?
I see the up to level 2, which means without full single model collaboration. But up to that point, I see that taking root pretty quickly. Some projects are already doing it. Government has said it will buy all of its projects on that basis by 2016, and I think we'll just about make that. Beyond that, but it's still very much a construction process. Beyond that, and really making it lead into the management of the asset after completion, and then moving up to level 3, it will take some bigger changes still, and I think those are our big challenges. We're looking at them now. What kind of world will look like in 2016 when we start this process, bearing in mind how fast the technology changes. But there's been an extraordinarily high degree of enthusiasm for the change to this way of working. There's been a very low level of resistance. So I'm optimistic, actually, that we will maintain some kind of leadership position in working out how an industry can digitize itself.
And the last one, in your opinion, what should be the role of the schools in the definition of a BIM national strategy?
Architecture schools and universities, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, clearly, I think the answer to that comes out of many of the answers I've given to other questions. So again, if you want to change culture, you start young. I was taught at university, that there's a certain way of working, we had caricatures of what architects were, what engineers were, what contractors were, and so on. So even in my days at university, my prejudices were being built up by my teachers. I hope the prejudices that were built up now will be ones that are collaborative working. So it's about introducing them to the cultural change, introducing them and inspiring them with the possibilities of the technology. It doesn't matter so much teaching the technology, it will change so fast anyway. But fundamentally about preparing people to work in a new way. I spoke at a conference in London about how I thought this might change the structure of our industry. And an almost tearful architectural student came to me afterwards and said, where do I find out about this? I'm not being taught about this. I'm being taught about a world that seems to be disappearing. And I think that's a real threat in the schools, that they teach the way the world used to be and not the way it can be.